Hello, my name is Jeff Noonan. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Windsor in Canada, and thanks for the opportunity to address the conference. I'm going to speak on the theme of life value, war, and social peace, and clearly the ongoing war in Ukraine is the immediate motivation for my talk today, although, as I'll try and explain briefly, given the brevity of the comments, this position has deeper roots in work that I've done on, I suppose we could say, the ethical foundations of socialism, which I see as best explained by the idea developed by the Canadian philosopher John McMurtry of life value. But to begin, let me just try to explain my approach to the ongoing war in Ukraine. One of the dismaying things about the conflict is that if we look back at it, there were a number of steps along the road to war which, had they gone in a different direction, the conflict could have been avoided. We can go back 30 years to the American promise not to expand NATO, a promise which was repeatedly violated and which ended up precipitating the current conflict. So that's the sort of deep historical context. But in the immediate context, Putin and Lavrov spelled out some minimum demands that, had they become the substance of negotiation, certainly could have avoided war. But then also, I think, from the Russian standpoint, the decision to invade, I think, is going to turn out to be a strategic error of world historical significance. Right? There was no danger of Russia ever invading Europe, but by the same reasoning, I think there was no danger of NATO ever invading Russia. So the current conflict really is a kind of, from my perspective, caused by a lot of anachronistic reasoning on both sides. Right, the weight of Cold War ideology carrying over into a post-Cold War world has led to this very destructive conflict, which shows no sign of abating anytime soon. The longer a war goes on, the more entrenched positions become, as we can see now. We have political and military escalation. I'm not convinced it's going to lead to a nuclear exchange, but it is going to continue to grind away at lives in the Ukraine, grind away at the lives of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, destroy infrastructure. And it's in order to prevent that destruction that I think Marxists have to be interested in the minutiae and the day-to-day of diplomacy and politics. Now, I can understand why a critic would challenge me and say, why should Marxists care about the day-to-day of capitalist politics, right? Why should Marxists try to insert themselves in what is properly the business of bureaucrats, politicians, diplomats, all of whom are interested only in saving the system, prosecuting their advantage within it? Well, my answer to that question is that the essential goal of Marxists is not to understand the world, as Marx said, but to change it. But change it how? And in what direction? And here I turn to the idea of life value. Now, I think we can find the idea of life value across not only the history of philosophy, and not just Western philosophy, but I think philosophy globally. If I had a lot more time, I could go into that issue. And if you're interested, please email me, and I'll be happy to talk about that. But the idea of life value is embedded in our relationships with the natural world and with each other. Human beings have to make connections in order to exist. We have to connect to the natural world. I'm breathing in oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide, and that's fueling the cellular energy that keeps me alive, that allows me to address you. But we need to connect with each other too, most basically through forms of productive labor and reproductive labor. We have to give birth to the next generation. They have to be cared for. We have to grow food. We have to build computer networks, publish books, organize schools. All of these connections are what McMurtry calls life values. Right? Life value comes in two forms. In the most basic sense, it is any resource, natural or social, found or built, physical or symbolic, that satisfies a human life requirement. Right? So I have to satisfy my requirements for adequate hydration and adequate nutrition, but we also have need for education, for health care, for artistic expression and the appreciation of the same, for friendship, for love, right? All of these are understood as life values. When we satisfy these fundamental needs, our capacities to think, to relate to each other, to create, to sense, and to feel are enabled. They develop. And so I see socialism as I've put it elsewhere, a democratic life value economy in a society. If we want to put this in Marxist terms, think to his aphorism in the Critique of the Gotha program, right, where he says, in a fully developed communist society, the principle of distribution will be from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. Right? Now, Marx is just making quick notes on the Gotha program of the German Social Democratic Party. He never fully spelled out his reasoning, but I think implicit there is McMurtry's idea of life value. Each of us makes a contribution to the commonwealth through the realization of our talents and capabilities. I teach for a living, other people farm, other people heal, other people transport needed inputs, other people mine. All of us are making contributions to the store of resources that we require. Now, of course, in a capitalist society, labor is not directly life-satisfying. It's exploited and it's alienating in ways that I'm sure all of the conference participants understand. I don't need to go into the basics of Marx's ideas of exploitation and alienation. But what's socialism about? Socialism is about freeing natural and social wealth on the one hand for need-satisfying uses, and on the other hand, for the sake of allowing us to fully and freely develop our capacities. So what is a worse negation of a democratic life economy than a war? War is ecologically destructive. It's destructive of human life. It's destructive of accumulated infrastructure. It produces hatreds. It deepens national chauvinisms. If there is any worse way of destroying the possibility of working class solidarity than war, I've never encountered it. Fortunately, I live in a peaceful country in Canada, literally right on the American border. I'm not worried about an American missile coming and hitting my study. Fortunately, if I were in Kharkiv, that would not be the case, right? In order to advance the political agenda that must be advanced in the short and long term, to help us move towards a socialist alternative, nationally and internationally, Marxists need to be opposed to war, right? And not just in the abstract, and that means we have to be able to dig into the political details that lead up to conflicts. I'm not going to get into them in any detail today. Obviously, I only have a few minutes to address, but I want to conclude by talking what I've called elsewhere the conditions of social peace. And in particular, I want to focus on the most important ideological condition of social peace, right, which is counteracting chauvinist nationalist myths. Right? Now, of course, there are different national identities on the planet, and they are not problematic. They become problematic when they serve as fuels for armed conflict. Right? So everybody has a national identity, or these can be simple, these can be complex, right? But simply having a national identity is not in itself problematic, right? People speak different languages, they have different cuisines, not a problem. But in the lead up to war, we see national identities weaponized, right? And so we get the myth of Greater Russia, or we get the myth of the heroic Ukrainian nation resisting imperial Russia. There's always some truth to these myths, but they become mythical because they suppress complexity, they suppress connections, and they serve to harden people within their own world against another, right? And that's how you get people willing to risk their lives to kill and to destroy. Now, I'm not making moralistic points here, although of course there's a moral dimension to War and Peace. Instead, I'm trying to make a political point that if socialists are really interested in the unity of working people, right? Not the submergence of all identities into some amorphous universalism, right? It's good that there are different languages, different perspectives, different cuisines, different artistic traditions, right? That's a resource. Those are concrete expressions of life value as the realization of life capacities. But what we have to be opposed to is the hardening of these identities into chauvinist weapons used against others or to justify attacks on others, right? And the most consistent way of resisting these myths and their weaponization is not to remain aloof and say, one day the class struggle will sort this all out. The class struggle won't sort it all out if different elements of the working class are blowing each other up on a battlefield. And so in the short term, I think it's the job of Marxists to try and promote conditions of social peace, right? So that there can be political, economic, and social solutions to the conflicts, both historical and contemporary, that have divided nations and different national fractions of the working class. That means supporting diplomacy. It means not cheerleading for one side or the other in a conflict, right? It means opposing imperialism, but not in the abstract, right? Of course, the expansion of NATO is not a good thing from a socialist perspective, right? But simply being opposed to NATO expansion is different from supporting the politics, the positive politics, that can lead to further development of a socialist alternative. So just as we support strikes and unions, even though as Marxists we might not think that unions are the complete and final solution, just as we support institutions like public health care and free public education, even though those on their own are not going to bring us a socialist future. We support everything that improves the lives of people in the short term and enables them to get along with each other. Not necessarily to love each other, socialism is not Christianity, but to look on each other as cooperative members of a developing whole. Right? And so the conditions of social peace in the short term promote those types of positive relationships between people. Right? And when solutions are found that do not involve the destruction of other lives, right, there's more of us left to enjoy the planet and to work towards its improvement, to work towards, hopefully, one day, living in a globe which is composed of different self-organizing societies, each of which is using its resources and its wealth to satisfy the needs of its citizens for the sake of their all-round development, or, as Marx put it, from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the conference.